Chapter 50. The Prince of God. Genesis 32, 1-32. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw him, he said, "This is God's host." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. My servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stay there until now. And I have oxen and asses, flocks and men servants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find grace in thy sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks, and herds, and the camels into 2 bands, and said, "If Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape." And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, Return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant, for with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become 2 bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. And thou sayest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats, and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine, and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, "Pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove." And he commanded the foremost, saying, "When Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, Whose art thou? And whither goest thou? And whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, They be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us." And so commanded he the second and the third, and all that followed the droves, saying, "On this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. And say ye moreover, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face, peradventure he will accept of me." So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. And he rose up that night, and took his 2 wives, and his 2 woman servants, and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them, and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaketh." And he said, "I will not let thee go, except thou bless me." And he said unto him, "What is thy name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed." And Jacob asked him and said, "Tell me, I pray thee, thy name." And he said, "Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name?" And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Penuel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. Genesis 32, 1-32. When Jacob began his journey to Haran, he had at Bethel a vision of angels ascending and descending. Now, on his return, he is met by the angels of God. Verse 1. He recognized them, and he named the place Mahanaim, meaning two hosts, verse 2. The one host or company was his family, the other being the angels. Jacob had recognized that he was not alone. The Lord was with him. Given this fact, Jacob decided against sneaking into the land. He could have gone home quietly to get his father's protection. He sent messengers to his brother Esau, who was in Edom, to inform Esau of his return, verse 3. Esau was to be told of Jacob's prosperity and wealth, verses 4 and 5. There was to be no evasion. The messengers returned to tell Jacob that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men, verse 6. It is possible that the size of this company of men had as its purpose to impress Jacob with Esau's power. This is likely, with the added proviso that Esau could easily overwhelm Jacob with his men. The impulsive Esau may not have been entirely sure what course to take. Jacob's reaction was to prepare for disaster. Jacob had his family and livestock divided into two companies, so that, if Esau attacked, some at least would escape. Verses 7 and 8. Esau's 400 men were perhaps only a part of his forces, since Seir, later Edom, was the old domain of the Horites. Jacob also sent ahead of his family presents for his brother. Esau, 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 she-asses and 10 foals. This was a total of 550 animals divided into 5 groups, each to announce itself as a present for Jacob, verses 13 to 20. Jacob knew his brother, and he knew how to please him. Jacob's gifts alone were enough to make Esau wealthy. In Genesis 36, 6-8, we read that Esau still lived at least part-time with or close to his parents. Seir was not yet fully his possession. Because the homelands could not support both Jacob and Esau, Esau left for Seir. From this, it is clear that the two brothers lived together in peace for a time. Before this precautionary step was taken, Jacob prayed earnestly to God, verses 9 to 12. He reminded God of his promise, but Jacob began by confessing his unworthiness and God's grace. The words of verse 10 are especially wonderful. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant, for with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become 2 bands. In this prayer, Jacob asks, first, for deliverance from Esau's plan to kill him. He says honestly, I fear him. Jacob does not lie to God. He fears also for his wives and children. Second, he reminds God of his promises, covenant promises, because the covenant is his future and the source of contention with Esau. Jacob sent his servants with the gifts for Esau ahead of him in 5 groups. Then the womenfolk and children were sent over the ford Jabbok. Jacob was now alone. In verses 24 to 30, we have an account of Jacob's wrestling with someone, that is, with God, through the night. We have an interpretation of the episode in Hosea 12, 3-5. He took his brother by the heel in the womb, and by the strength he had power with God. Yea, he had power over the angel, and prevailed. He wept and made supplication unto him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spake with us. Even the Lord God of hosts. The Lord is his memorial. In these verses, Hosea, speaking to the covenant people, asks them to look to their forefather Jacob and emulate him. Before his birth, he seized his brother's heel, eager to gain the promise of God to Abraham. This, then, is the strength of Jacob which God respects, his tenacity. It is in this sense that Jacob prevailed with God in what is described as wrestling. God, in confronting Jacob, quote, would not overthrow his faith and constancy, end quote. Hosea tells us that Jacob, quote, wept and made supplication unto, end quote, God. He, with all his being, asked God, cried out to God, implored God to sustain him and to use him as his covenant man. This was a remarkable faith. Jacob could live and die a rich man, a happy man, and an honoured man, but his intense and passionate hope was to be the ancestor of the Messiah. Jacob at Bethel had seen his mother's word confirmed. In subsequent revelations, the promises were repeated and detailed. Now, faced with possible death, Jacob wanted an open confirmation from God in the face of his rival Esau. He received it, as verse 5 tells us, in the fact of God's quote-unquote name, Exodus 3:14. The God who does not change, Malachi 3:6, would sustain and bless Jacob. There, in this strange wrestling, God, quote, spake with us, end quote, Hosea 12:4, and assured us also of his constancy. We change, but God does not. The details of this strange event are beyond us. We cannot conceive of them. Their meaning, however, is clear. Like Jacob, we must seek God's blessings and work and fight for them without ceasing. The tenacity of Jacob was such that, in this encounter, he would not end things unless he be blessed, verses 24 to 26. Jacob's wrestler asked, "What is thy name?" And when Jacob gave his name, he was told, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed." Verses 27 and 28. A prince in antiquity was not so by blood, but by the adoption of grace. Jacob was such a prince. Predestination, taught throughout the Bible, or better, assumed, does not negate responsibility, but requires it, and therefore God's tenacity was a manifestation of his calling and ordination. All struggle exacts a price, and Jacob came out of this with a shrunken sinew in his thigh. We pay a price in our struggle to manifest God's calling, and in terms of this world, we often cripple ourselves. But for Jacob, it was a triumph, and he named the place Penuel, meaning the face of God. Quote, "For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." Verse 30. He was thereafter a bit crippled. Verse 31. Awed by this event, his descendants thereafter would not eat that particular sinew in animals. Verse 32. This practice has no necessity attached to it by God's law. The Penuel experience is, past a certain point, beyond our comprehension, and deliberately so. Some things are not for us fully to understand, but we can grow in terms of them. We cannot accept God and His grace as a kind of natural endowment, but must recognize that His grace is sovereign, and our response must be one of determined struggle and growth therein. Jacob met the angel of the Lord first as an enemy of some kind, perhaps, but later saw him as the only hope of his life and sought his blessing. Rebekah had not sent for Jacob as she had promised to do when and if Esau relented of his plan to kill Jacob. God had still ordered Jacob to return, but to what? Jacob obeyed, but what was God's purpose for him? God's purpose was revealed in Jacob's new name, Israel, because he had struggled with both God and man and had prevailed. Verse 28. If God calls Jacob his prince, we had better be careful of being disrespectful of one whom God so honours.